Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for clicking on to today's European Outlook. It is Thursday, the 26th of September, and this is going to be a pretty in depth video today. And I want you to really bear with me on this one because I want to kind of explain a little few details with regards to what's going on in the atmosphere at the moment and leading us into the month of October, because it has been a very extreme past several weeks across the northern hemisphere. I want to try and possibly shed some light into why that has been the case. Now, if we look initially, we're going to look at the polar vortex, we're going to look at the Magellan oscillation, we're going to provide a little bit more background as to what these teleconnections actually are. Going to be looking at some information from MIT scientist Dr. Judah Cohen, who specializes in the polar vortex. We're going to look at his latest blog as well. So there's going to be a lot in this today. So just like I said, bear with me. But before we continue with the video, if you're enjoying the content here in the channel and you're relatively new, also thanks for joining in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and like the content, as well as leave a comment below. Also, there is a lot of very, very hard work going on here in the background to try and deliver accurate, unbiased, unhyped weather content here on Mark Hogan Weather on YouTube. But I'm trying to go deeper in terms of understanding what is going on within the atmosphere here. We've swung from a record positive North Atlantic oscillation during the month of August. We've seen record rain in northwestern UK. We've now swung to a record deep negative North Atlantic oscillation. That is that block and high over Greenland. Weather goes from deep negative, which was seen in August, strong positive over Europe, deep negative over Greenland. Storm track focused over the northwest UK. We've seen warm and dry across southern areas of the British Isles. We've flipped this on its head during the month of September. Record rainfall now down across the south of the UK. Drier conditions the further north you go. And I want to try and kind of explain in the best, simplest way possible for everybody to understand, because I'm also learning through this as well. I'm no expert, and I don't know. There's a lot of things about atmospheric physics and science that I simply is way over my head, and I'm never going to understand it. But I wanna ask the question first and foremost: what provided the flip from strong positive? Look at this here. This is the Arctic oscillation from the 1st of June, meteorological summer. We started off weekly negative, then it went positive, then neutral, then positive, right the way through the course of summer. And then, if you notice here, really from about the second or third week of August, we went from strong positive to now deep negative. We are heading back towards positive once again, or neutral at least. And I'm going to show you why I think this is going to take place. And there's a big head scratch going on with regards to the month of October, because we've got other driving forces behind all this. So we obviously look at the polar vortex, the strength of the polar vortex within the stratosphere, also the tropospheric polar vortex, which is the polar vortex that affects our weather directly. Stratospheric polar vortex does have a separate circulation to an extent, but there obviously is a coupling aspect to this as well. And I want to look at the tropics, because I believe anyway the tropics really does hold the key in terms of what type of weather pattern you see in the mid to high latitudes, depending on where that Magellan oscillation focuses on. During the month of August, it was primarily over the Indian Ocean and the maritime continent, i.e. Northern Australia, extending through Indonesia up into Southeast Asia. When you have that strong energy released in terms of thunderstorm activity, that then releases energy further north up into the mid to high latitudes. That changes the strength, shape of the jet stream, and also the orientation of the ridges and troughs. Deepens troughs and ridges, but also can contract them as well, stretching the overall atmosphere out in the mid and upper levels. What created the change initially, first of all, I personally think there a lot has to do with the Southern Oscillation Index. We were firmly in negative territory. That is the measure of atmospheric pressure between Darwin, Northern Australia, and the South Pacific, Tahiti. We went from strong negative, which is reflective of an El Nino type atmosphere, and we've seen the very strong positive, low pressure over Greenland, high pressure to the south over the North Atlantic here. We've had fluctuations in that, obviously, but the month of August in particular, we actually seen the SOI, or the Southern Oscillation Index, go even deeper negative, more indicative of El Nino. And then in combination with the heat and the drought across much of Eastern Europe as well, that then kind of set the scene for a record strong negative North Atlantic oscillation. Let's actually have a look and see what a negative Arctic oscillation or North Atlantic oscillation actually is. So if we look at this here, sorry, bear with me just a second here, everybody. Let's zoom this in. So I'm going to try and not waffle on too long. This is probably going to be close to a half an hour explanation, but I need to get this out. My head driving up the A9 last night was swimming with information, and I want to try and provide this to you as clear as possible. So, Arctic oscillation, first of all, the stronger the polar vortex, the stronger the winds are within the stratospheric level of the atmosphere. The stronger, the colder the vortex at the roots over the North Pole, the stronger the winds blow around that circulation. It's like a large low pressure system or storm system over the Arctic region. When that belt of strong winds within the upper levels of the atmosphere are strong, they tend to reflect a stronger polar vortex, more zonal polar vortex within the mid latitudes here. So that bottles all the cold up over the pole. And you can see this diagram showing the strong vortex, and then essentially all the cold bottled up to the north. We also flood both North America and Europe with oceanic or maritime air. So mild conditions, wet, windy, etc., tends to happen when you've got a strong positive Arctic oscillation. Negative Arctic oscillation, we've seen that strong positive during the month of August in particular. Hot, dry July, August, I should say, in the south of the UK, wetter and cooler across the north of the UK here due to the position of that jet stream in association with a very strong Azores high and a very deep low near Iceland. That is your classic North Atlantic oscillation as well as positive. Negative Arctic oscillation. So basically the North Atlantic oscillation quite often reflects the Arctic oscillation positive mode. You've got the strong negative over Greenland, over Iceland, strong positive over the Azores, strong jet stream in between. And essentially this is what we've seen back during the month of August. Looking at the weak negative Arctic oscillation, this is when you've got a weakened polar vortex, meaning that you've got a slacker wind circling that pool of cold air that is only still growing at this stage. Obviously, we're still in the month of September, only just. But notice here that we start to see, with those weakening of winds within the stratosphere as well as the troposphere, you're then allowing more buckling. Warmer air trapped within the mid-latitudes can go north, and in turn, colder comes south within the troughs. So you've got the ridges associated with the northward push of heat up into the high latitudes. You've got the colder dropping south in the consequential troughs. And you've got this waviness, this amplified pattern. And that is exactly what we're seeing taking place. And the North Atlantic oscillation is deeply negative at the moment. Therefore, we've got this push of warmth up into Greenland. We've got it over the Ural Mountains as well, over Russia. And in turn, that's allowing cold to come south out of the Arctic and into the mid-latitude pattern. We're not so much seeing that reflected in the North American side of the Atlantic, but we are seeing waves of cold air coming south over the west of Europe here, and we're also seeing that over parts of West Central Asia as well. Very strong heat dome over Eastern Europe, over parts of North America here, where we're seeing record heat interspersed with record cold due to that waviness of the jet. So let's take this somewhat further. So I think, personally speaking, that the rise of the Southern Oscillation Index from negative, reflective of El Nino, went into positive territory reflective of La Nina. And La Ninas tend to take momentum out of the atmosphere, and therefore we allow some of this buildup of warmth that has been trapped over the last several months within the mid-latitudes, even parts of the high latitudes as well. We've seen some very warm conditions. But due to the slowing down of momentum within the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere around the northern hemisphere, we've allowed some of this heat to then get lifted north, and then therefore we've seen the amplification of the overall pattern. So I think the SOI going from negative to firmly positive. Notice it's starting to go back towards neutral once again, which is really quite interesting here, and that might be due to the eastward progress of the Mont-Julian oscillation. Actually, this might be forcing the SOI to go back towards neutral once again. So we need to pay attention to that. It's complex, and I'm even working hard to try and understand what is going on myself. So we've obviously discussed a little bit about the Arctic Oscillation, North Atlantic Oscillation, going from firmly positive in August to firmly negative during the month of September. I think this has been one of the triggers for change, but also the Mont-Julian Oscillation has been stuck in a phase promoting milder conditions over North America and over Europe here. The positive Arctic Oscillation, North Atlantic Oscillation, that has been aided by the MJO being in phases 4 and 5, which is over the maritime continent. That tends to lead to hotter or warmer conditions over the eastern United States and over the western side of Europe here. We've seen a very back and forth, but the MJO itself has been going from phases 4 and 5 into the colder phases. So we've seen the pulse of warmth lifting eastwards. What actually is the MJO? Let's have a look and see what that is indicating here, and then we'll look at the polar vortex, and then we'll start to build a case for the month of October here. So let me just bear with me just a second here. Very quickly, how can the MJO affect the weather? Now, I'm just going to touch on this very, very briefly in case people are saying, what the heck is the MJO, Mark? When an MJO moves, this is the enhanced pulse of convection over the equator. It runs from west to east. When an MJO moves eastward through the Indo-Pacific region, it produces large, slowly changing departures from the normal precipitation within the tropics. These departures change the atmospheric circulation, and through the phenomenon of Rossby wave dispersion, the changes can propagate into the high latitudes. So that is the release of energy from the pulse of convection within the tropics, moving northwards here, and then that affects the Rossby wave train. The changes can propagate into higher latitudes. The accompanying picture from, and a name that I'm not going to try and pronounce, illustrates, so this kind of graphic here on the right hand side, illustrates the phenomenon for the situation where the base state atmospheric circulation is extremely simple. The picture shows upper atmospheric ridges and troughs emanating from the region of precipitation forcing, i.e. the enhanced phase of the MJO, over the West Pacific and the extending poleward into both hemispheres. The circulation features can alter the path, this is important, alter the path and intensity of synoptic waves in the mid-latitudes, and thereby can affect the weather. The actual base state through which these Rossby waves propagate is very complicated, involving jet streams, storm tracks, and other regional circulation features. These features channel or interact with the Rossby wave energy and result in a pattern of troughs and ridges that is highly variable from case to case. So depending on where the MJO is positioned determines what type of energy is propagated north. Now, obviously, we can have strong influence by the Mann-Julian oscillation, or we can have weak influence from the Mann-Julian oscillation. That's another thing to consider. If it's more amplified, the MJO is more amplified. When we look at this phase diagram here, you can see that the further away it is from the center of the graphic, the more amplification it has and the more influence it has on the atmosphere towards the pole. So you can see here that we went through early to mid-September, phases 5, then into phases 6. Now, what's important about those two phases, by the way, was phase 5 tends to promote ridging in the eastern US, North America, and Western Europe. Now, we've seen the hot end to August, for example. It was in it was stuck in phase 4 and 5 through the majority of August. Hence why we had the very strong positive Arctic oscillation and North Atlantic oscillation. It was due to the phase 4 and 5 to an extent. There's other aspects to consider as well. But it amplified in phase 6. What actually is phase 6 of the MJO? What does that correlate to, especially here in Europe? Let's have a look and see. This is a very interesting graphic. So phase 6 looks like this. So you've got the energy. Phase 4 and 5 is directly over the maritime continent. That tends to promote, even in summer, but more to a greater extent during the winter season. Phase 4 and 5 tends to lead to warmer conditions during the winter season. So December, January, February, if you're in a phase 4 or 5 of the MJO, you're likely to have ridging over eastern North America and ridging or wet conditions over Western Europe. Milder conditions promotes a phase 4 and phase 5. Once you then see the phase 5 into phase 6, you see blocking taking place over the UK and over Europe. And look at this here. And this is probably going to help slightly explain why we're seeing the type of September that we're seeing. We've went from a strengthening phase 5 into phase 6, blocking high pressure UK and Europe. So remember, we've started to see the blockiness in the pattern. Now, I think the trigger point to change has been the SOI going positive, reflective more of La Nina as opposed to El Nino. But it goes further than this. The strong block over particularly Northern Europe, but also over Northern North America, we're starting to see the belt of warmth start to get lifted northwards as the MJO strengthened in phase 6. Are you with me? I hope you are. I hope I'm explaining this well enough. And I think the reasons why we've seen exceptional rainfall during the month of September is due to the level of warmth within the mid-latitudes. We've got record warm sea surface temperatures. And when you start to lift the high to the north, you're then lowering pressure over a very warm and humid and juicy environment. You've got a very warm Mediterranean basin. That is part of the reason why I think we've seen exceptional rainfall in parts of Eastern Europe. And then the MJO rotating through into phases 7, northerly block develops over Greenland and over the Arctic region. So if we look back at this chart right here, you can see that we went from positive in the month of August to deeply negative in the month of September. And if we look at the MJO, it's rotating through phases 6 into phases 7, into phases 8, and it's actually amplifying in phases 1 and 2. So that is the eastward progress of that pulse of energy within the tropics. That's changing the Rossby train, the Rossby wave pattern over the northern hemisphere, creating this blocky, record-breaking negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation for the month of September. This is an unusual setup, but there's a lot of heat that's been stored up over the summer season through the Mediterranean. within the Atlantic basin. We've seen record warm 500 millibar temperatures over the Atlantic, for example. All that heat has to go somewhere, and if you shift the MJO from the Indian Ocean through the maritime continent, through the Pacific, you're then changing the atmosphere over the northern hemisphere, and then in turn all that heat starts to get shifted around with the ridges and the troughs. The jet gets forced south, the jet gets forced north, and when you drive cold air into a warm, humid, juicy environment with record warm sea surface temperatures, there's no surprise we're going to see record breaking rainfall. We've seen it in the north of the UK during August. We're now seeing it in the month of September across the southern UK. We're going to see more heavy rainfall over the next week or so here. So this is me trying to understand and then explain to you why this pattern is evolving the way it is. So that's the Mann-Julian oscillation. It went through the blocky phases of 7, 8, and 1. We've got the negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation. We've got that big block over Greenland. We're allowing that cold air with ridging over Eastern Europe and the block over Greenland. That opens the door to northerly winds coming down from the north. Jet stream further south as well. And therefore, it's crossing over warmer than average sea surface temperatures. With the jet further south, you've got warmer waters, you've got more fuel, you've got more moisture within the atmosphere, and you're bringing more heavy rainfall. Another aspect, we had a cool pool over Central Europe. That drifted up over the UK. We had warm, humid air in the low levels. We had that cool pool in the mid and upper levels. That creates like a vacuum from above. So it sucks when you've got the cooler aloft, warmer at the surface. That's like holding a Henry Hoover at the top of the atmosphere, pointing down the way and drawing the air up. As it goes up, it cools, it condenses, and it brings rainfall. And that's why we're seeing Woburn have 140 millimeters of rain within 3 days. Oxford, records going back into the 1800s, wettest day on record. Warm sea surface temperatures, cooler aloft, and a lot of warm, juicy air in the mid to low levels of the atmosphere is creating this scenario overall. But that's strengthening phase 6 MJO, blocking, lifting north, cold air coming in and driving that Arctic air into a very warm, humid air mass over Europe. And the added boost being the Mediterranean, 28 Celsius waters, you're then creating an environment for exceptional rainfall. We've seen that in parts of the Middle East. We've seen it in the southeastern United States. Remember that potential tropical cyclone 8 never became an actual tropical system, but it dumped 28 inches of rain. It was record breaking for parts of North Carolina. And you notice here, if you look at a map, all these areas are on the same latitude, or very similar latitude, extending from southeastern United States, southern Europe, Mediterranean, into the Middle East. It's all in the same places because we had this strong blocky pattern, to the north. So we're seeing the changes now starting to take place as the rotation into 7, 8, and 1 is taking place with the MJO. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on within the stratosphere. And this is the blog here by Dr. Judah Cohen. And I'll show you a couple of things in just a second here. But Dr. Judah Cohen is an expert on atmospheric science and research out of the University of the MIT, and also looks specifically at the polar vortex. So this is a blog that he put out a few days ago here. Why the unusual high polar cap heights? So what is the polar cap heights? It's the thickness value within the polar stratosphere and the atmosphere in general. And we've had an unusually warm stratosphere over the top of the pole, and during the course of the summer, but extending now into the month of September, we've seen unusually weak mean zonal winds. We've had an unusually weak polar vortex during the month of September. You can see that here quite nicely on this ECMWF zonal mean wind anomaly chart here at 10 HPA. So that's up at the top of the stratosphere. You can see here the thick red line represents the average. The top line represents record strong, and the bottom red shows record week. And you can see here that we are actually in record week territory. It goes slightly above the record week and then goes back below. So it's going to kind of gradually strengthen and then ease again. We've got this strong warming taking place off Siberia at the moment. But you notice here, eventually it does go back to average towards the middle portions of October. And we'll talk about that in just a second here, because everything's got a delay, a lag within the atmosphere, and that has to be taken into consideration. But there's no question it is at record weak levels at the moment here. So the winds within the stratosphere are blowing at the weakest level that has been observed in recorded history for the time of the year. And Judah explains a little bit potentially as to why. It's his theory. I don't think it's recognized in the scientific community, but his theories make quite a lot of sense actually. So we've got this weak polar vortex at the moment here. You can see that if we look at the 10 HPA temperatures, the building of that vortex, notice the warmth over. This is way up at the 10 millibar level, of course. You can see here the strong warming over Siberia. There's the polar vortex, the blues, the purples, showing the cold column starting to grow colder and colder. As it grows colder, the winds around it go stronger. But you notice here that we've got this constant energy getting pushed at the 10 millibar level, upper levels of the stratosphere. Notice here this warming continues to push the vortex towards North America, Greenland, and Northern Europe here. That could be one of the reasons why the jet is getting forced further south as well, by the way. You've got this, I quite often find that the upper levels reflect the lower levels, and this boundary between warm temperatures and cold temperatures away up even at 10 millibars within the stratosphere tend to reflect where the jet stream wants to go in the lower portions of Earth's atmosphere, around 35,000 feet or so here. But notice here as we play through the loop out of September into the month of October, still seeing that warming. You notice here the column, the polar vortex itself is continuing to cool as it naturally does so. Obviously days much shorter than nights now. The cold's continuing to build as we've lost sunlight over this region of the world, and that lobe of cold air continues to grow colder, but it's getting forced south. It's not right over the top of the pole. It's actually leaning more towards the North America and Europe side of the hemisphere here, and then we're still seeing these warm pools getting drawn out of Siberia, Asia, towards the pole and forcing the displacement of this vortex. So it's unusual to see this at this time of the year. And a better way of looking at that is the 10 millibar anomaly here. Play through the loop, so this is the difference compared to normal. Look at the amount of warming that we're seeing pushing out of Asia, over the top of the pole, and displacing that vortex further south. And that continues through week 1 of October, even into the middle portions of October. We can still see that warming take place. The reasons for that warming may be explained in the strength of the blocking that we're seeing over North America and over Eurasia. Why the unusual high polar cap heights and warm temperatures all summer is mostly a mystery. So the warmth within the polar stratosphere during the course of the summer remains somewhat of a mystery. These are the words and the blog of Dr. Judah Cohen, but could be related to the infusion of a tremendous amount of water vapor. This is interesting, into the stratosphere with the Hunga Tonga volcanic eruption. And obviously it takes years for the dispersion of material from volcanic eruptions. Remember that tremendous eruption, January 2022, could be related to that. So I'll repeat that. Why the unusual PCHs, or polar cap heights, and warm temperatures within the stratosphere all summer long, summer just gone, is mostly a mystery, but could be related to the infusion of a tremendous amount of water vapor into the stratosphere with the Tonga Hunga volcanic eruption. But it is important to keep in mind that water vapor is a greenhouse gas. In summer, when there is an abundance of sunshine, water vapor can absorb solar radiation and heat the atmosphere locally. However, in winter, when there is a perpetual darkness, water vapor emits long-wave radiation, causing the local atmosphere to cool. So in other words, it could be warm in the stratosphere during the summer season when you've got all that strong incoming solar radiation, but in the winter it could actually be the opposite to that. And that's something we also need to keep in the consideration. So water vapor could be a net source of heat in summer and a net source of cooling in winter. This could result in warm, positive stratospheric PCHs in summer, but cold, negative PCHs in winter, i.e. a strong winter polar vortex. But I could argue for a weak PV without evoking radiative arguments. During the third week of September, just a beast of a block, high pressure, exited over the Urals and Scandinavia, coupled with downstream low pressure trough in Northeast Asia, the northern North Pacific. A wave pattern of this amplitude and length is highly unusual for September and more common during the winter season. In other words, the negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation is being triggered potentially by the strong blockiness, possibly the SOI going from negative to positive, and the MJO rotating through the warm phases into the cold phases. So, does this make sense? I really, really do hope it's making sense to you, because it's trying to understand myself, but then also trying to explain what I've learned. And this is what just floats my boat. I love this kind of stuff. This is what I'm trying to understand, is what's going on and where do we go from here. So we know that we've got the waves of cold air coming south, and we've got the weak polar vortex, etc., etc. It looks as if the polar vortex is going to strengthen. And if you read this blog, I'll try and put a link in the description below to this blog post by Judah Cohen, explaining a little bit more here. But we do have a record negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation at the moment here, and there is other aspects to consider here. Let me just real quick, the near terms explained here with where the cold is within the middle latitudes versus the warmth. The longer term is quite interesting, actually. Let me just see here if I can find the long term here. So just quickly, this is this is a cross section of the atmosphere from 1,000 feet up to 1 millibar. So 1,000 millibars up to the very top. You notice here we've got this cool, we've got this belt of warmth. That is the warm polar stratosphere. At the very, very bottom, you notice here that we went from the end of August and beginning of September with low heights over the Arctic, and then it went, you can see the warmth trapped within that kind of 50 to 10 millibar level, very warm polar cap heights at this level here. So this is within the stratosphere from top to bottom of the stratosphere. 10 millibars is the top of the stratosphere, 50 millibars is the bottom of the stratosphere. And you notice here that we've got the warmest anomaly here, but then this propagates downwards towards the lower atmosphere, and then that then in turn forces the Arctic oscillation to then go negative, going from positive, going to negative. Notice here that it's starting to go towards the 20th of September, 3rd of October. We're starting to see heights coming back up, or down, should I say, over the Arctic region here. So in other words, the polar vortex, and this would here would make sense. If we look at this graphic, you notice here that we're at the tank about 5 days or so. We're going back toward neutral once again, and this graphic in Judah's blog post would reflect that based on the polar cap heights. So the MJO promoted the blocking, I think, coupled with the SOI. It's expected to go into phases 2, 3, and likely back to phases 4 and 5. And therefore, I would expect this pattern to pull away once again. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see the Arctic oscillation and the North Atlantic oscillation going back positive once again. once the rotation goes back towards phases 4 and 5, which is warm phases, the maritime continent that is. But sometimes it collapses, then it re-emerges in other places as well. Obviously, the La Nina, where the warm, coldest waters sit, East Pacific, West Pacific, Central Pacific. Where the warm water is, where the warm water tends to be where the MJO maybe wants to go to and create the convection and the response to the atmosphere, etc. So while the MJO is on the move, and while the polar vortex is expected to go back to stronger levels, once again, it can't stay weak forever, obviously. The question is, where do we go as we step out of September and into the month of October? I want to show you this here. So looking at the 10 millibar level here of the stratosphere. So this is off NOAA's website. This is the here and now. You can start to see the polar vortex becoming stronger over Greenland and over the Norwegian Sea here. Notice here it's slightly off-centre. The pole is bang slap in the middle here. If we skip to a week from now, you can see that the 10 HPA level is continuing to cool. That little area of blue and the L represent lower pressure shows that the column within the upper levels of the stratosphere is growing colder and colder. Looking out to 10 days from now, and you can see here that it continues to expand slowly, but it is still expanding. So you would then start to think polar vortex, the winds are going to strengthen, and we will start to see the Arctic Oscillation, North Atlantic Oscillation going positive once again. Skipping it to 384 hours away. This is way down the road. But look at this here. It's growing stronger and it's expanding. Still slightly off center, but it is growing stronger nonetheless. Does that suggest that we've got a milder October or November coming up due to this? Possibly. But if we look at the lower portions of the stratosphere, we've got a rather different picture. Look at all the yellows, even the slight orangey colours. This shows the blocking pattern. And this is tropospheric driven, by the way. It's what's going on within the lower atmosphere, emanating up through into the stratosphere that's causing this weakness in the polar vortex at the moment here. So it's bottom up energy flux propagation here. And you can see that while the polar vortex within the upper levels is growing stronger, slowly but gradually growing stronger, let's skip out to a week from now, and you can still see the yellows representing blocking in the lower portion of the stratosphere. So it's seeing the presence of blocking, high latitude blocking, positive heights up into the high latitude pattern from 500 millibars or 18,000 feet above our heads up into the lower stratosphere here. So there is a decoupling, there's a difference going on between the very top and the lower portion of the stratosphere. Even skipping out to 240 hours from now at 50 millibars, again, we still see a lot of yellows. We're starting to lose the yellows right enough. So it's possible that we're going to start to see the blocky pattern ease in intensity. And then as we skip out, all the way out to 384 hours, it's still not showing blues, representing a very, very cooling within the lower stratosphere. So let's look at the models and see where we're going here. We are seeing the change in the top of the stratosphere. We're seeing the eastward progress of the MJO. Does that mean that we're going to flip warm all of a sudden? I don't think it is. This is the GFS extended model here, looking over the northern hemisphere. This is the upcoming 7-day period here. You see the strong block, northwest Atlantic up into Greenland, strong deep trough extending from the very top of Scandinavia, the Norwegian Sea, where it meets the Arctic Ocean, all the way down the western side of Europe here, with the exceptions of Iberia. Watch what happens as we play through this loop. And the wild card, of course, it's the tropics. We've got Helene, Category 2 now, expected to become Category 3, possibly Category 4 before making landfall later on today. Look at this here. As I play through this loop, you notice that the high does not just disappear. all the way out to the period between Sunday the 6th and Sunday the 13th of October, we still have a lot of blocking over the North Atlantic and Greenland, even extending up into the Arctic region here. And we continue to play all the way through towards the second half of August here, and we're still seeing the block, the North Atlantic oscillation being negative, block to the west, block up over Greenland. Therefore, you would expect to see colder interspersed with mild conditions. Obviously, we've got a rather active jet. I explained that in yesterday's video. We've got areas of low pressure coming in from the west, but further south, we've got this constant push of cold due to that block over Greenland trying to push southwards. So you get the overall idea. Wet, stormy, cold is going to be the theme, it looks like, according to the GFS Extended. Let's have a look at Europe specifically over the same periods here, and let's look at the temperature anomalies here, because I'm conscious of time, but this is a pretty lengthy video, but I think it does merit time to explain. Look at the process as we play all the way through. We're still holding on to that cool signal all the way between the 3rd and the 10th, and then all the way out to the second half of September. In fact, it actually grows colder over the UK and Ireland here. So this is me building the case as to why the month of October could end up being average to even slightly below average. We may warm things up during week 3 and 4 of October, by the way. It wouldn't surprise me if we do see a change. But essentially, the take home from this is the blocky, favourable cold phases of the MJO, what's going on within the stratosphere. You could almost say what happens with those signals, then there's the lag of about 10 to 14 days. So this pattern that's built up now doesn't just disappear, despite the fact that we may see changes taking place, stratosphere, MJO, other aspects, other teleconnections. It looks as if it's wanting to linger through the majority of October. Let's take another look at another model. This is the CFSV2. Upcoming 7 days, looking over the Northern Hemisphere, blocky pattern, European trough, southeastern US ridge as well here. Play through the loop here. Again, the positive doesn't want to disappear. In fact, it actually re-strengthens as we go through week 1 and 2 of October here, and it then kind of starts to pull away. Notice here that we've got this ribbon of negative extending from the central United States across the Atlantic into the southern UK, block across the north. That would be a great pattern if it was in the winter season here. But this could be the side effect of what's triggered MJO, the strong blockiness, the upward propagation from troposphere into the stratosphere, weakening the polar vortex, etc., etc., etc. Look at this here. CFSV2 takes us all the way out to the 19th through the 26th of October, and that is still a negative Arctic oscillation and even North Atlantic oscillation pattern. Let's look at Europe temperatures, and you can see here, very similar story to the GFS ensemble here, and see what the 7-day anomalies are looking like. We will likely wash out the cold eventually. That is pretty much, I think we would struggle to hold on to the cold anomaly right the way through the month, but if you play through this loop, looks as if it takes us all the way to the 25th of October before it starts to indicate something somewhat warming. November wouldn't surprise me, by the way, if we see a positive Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation, phase 4 and 5 of the MJO, strengthening the polar vortex. It wouldn't surprise me, but we'll wait and see what happens. But it's very much a repeating pattern at the moment here, and a very, very interesting one nonetheless. Let's finish off by looking at the ECMWF weeklies here and see what it's indicating. And this is the period. Go back to the here and now. So you've got the cold anomaly at the moment here. Play through the loop again. ECM, GFS, CFSV2, all suggesting that at least the first half of October will have a cold anomaly over the UK, Ireland, and Western Europe. This is probably a record in terms of the length of video. I do apologise for the length of it, the in-depth look at it. It won't be for everybody, I get that, but I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and be sure to hit that like button comment and let me know what you think. And also hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Lots more to come. I'll probably stick to something a little bit more straightforward tomorrow in terms of what's going on with the weather at the moment. So if this has been just a little bit much, it won't be as heavy, I promise, tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and I'll see you all being well shortly with the Tropical Outlook. Bye for now.